She divorced the man who loved her, then found out he secretly paid her mother's medical bills. She divorced him on a rainy Thursday. Not because he had betrayed her, not because he had stopped loving her. She left because she believed love without security was simply another form of suffering. When the judge slid the final papers across the polished oak table, Daniel Carter signed first. His hand never trembled. His wedding ring rested beside the document for only a second before he slipped it into his pocket instead of leaving it behind. Emily noticed. It was such a small thing, yet somehow it hurt more than if he had thrown it away. "You can keep it," she whispered. He looked at the simple gold band in his palm. "It still reminds me of the happiest promise I ever made." Those were the last words he spoke to her. No accusations, no begging, no tears, only quiet acceptance. Outside the courthouse, the rain blurred the city into shades of gray. Emily stood beneath the entrance with her umbrella while Daniel walked into the storm without one. He never looked back. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Leave your city or country in the comments. And if you believe that kindness is never weakness, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, back to Emily's story. For 7 years, Daniel had loved Emily in the simplest ways. He woke up before dawn to make coffee exactly the way she liked it. He warmed her car every winter morning. He remembered every doctor's appointment, every birthday in her family, every little fear she never admitted aloud. He wasn't a wealthy man. He worked as an electrical engineer for a small company that repaired aging hospital equipment. The salary was enough for rent, groceries, and an occasional dinner downtown. Nothing luxurious, nothing impressive. Emily never minded in the beginning. When they first met at the university library, Daniel had nothing but a backpack full of textbooks and a shy smile that made her laugh. They dreamed together. One day they'd own a small house with a garden, maybe 2 children, a golden retriever, weekend road trips. Nothing extravagant, just peace. Life, however, had different plans. 2 years after their wedding, Emily's mother, Grace, collapsed while preparing dinner. Stage 3 ovarian cancer. The diagnosis arrived like winter without warning. Chemotherapy, radiation, surgeries, medication. The bills grew faster than hope. Emily wanted to quit her marketing job to care for her mother full-time. Daniel refused. "You stay with your mother," he told her. "I'll handle everything else." She believed he meant emotionally. She never imagined how literally he meant it. Daniel began working nights, weekends, emergency maintenance contracts, private consulting. He sold his motorcycle, then his vintage guitar. Eventually, he even refinanced the apartment without telling her. Whenever Emily apologized for becoming a burden, Daniel would smile. "You aren't a burden, but the treatments. We'll figure it out." She accepted his answer because she wanted to believe it. Love often makes people trust what they desperately need to hear. Months became years. Grace's health slowly stabilized. The doctors called it a miracle. Emily called it persistence. Neither of them knew another word. Sacrifice. Daniel rarely slept more than 4 hours each night. Dark circles settled permanently beneath his eyes. He skipped lunches, wore the same worn-out jackets, declined invitations from friends because he was always busy. Emily noticed he was changing. She simply misunderstood why. Instead of seeing exhaustion, she saw ambition disappearing. Instead of seeing sacrifice, she saw failure. Meanwhile, social media filled her screen with classmates buying luxury homes, traveling across Europe, celebrating promotions, driving imported cars. One college friend married a successful entrepreneur. Another vacationed in the Maldives every summer. Emily smiled politely at their photographs while secretly asking herself a question she hated. Why isn't this my life? Comparison is a quiet poison. It doesn't kill love all at once. It erodes gratitude one unnoticed day at a time. Daniel came home one Friday carrying grocery bags. His shirt smelled faintly of machine oil. Emily glanced at the cheap vegetables inside. "No steak." He hesitated. "Maybe next week." She sighed. "It always has. To be next week." He forced a smile. "I'm trying." "I know you're trying." Her voice softened for a moment before hardening again. "But trying doesn't pay bills forever." Daniel looked down at his rough hands. "I'll work harder." Emily rubbed her temples. "That's exactly what you've been saying for years." Neither realized those words would echo long after the marriage ended. A month later, Emily attended her 10-year college reunion alone. Daniel couldn't come. Another emergency repair. Another overtime shift. Another promise that work wouldn't always come first. At the reunion, champagne flowed freely. Former classmates wore designer suits and expensive watches. Stories of investments and promotions filled the ballroom. Someone asked where Daniel was. Emily laughed awkwardly. Working. What does he do now? Still fixing hospital equipment. A silence followed. Not cruel. Not intentional. Simply uncomfortable. One woman smiled sympathetically. You're still young, Emily. The sentence was harmless, yet it carried an invisible suggestion. You still have time to choose differently. Emily drove home in silence. Daniel waited awake despite finishing a 16-hour shift. He had reheated her favorite pasta twice. It was cold again. How was the reunion? She removed her heels without answering. Everyone's doing so well. I'm happy for them. You don't understand. Help me. She stared at him. No, Daniel. You don't understand. The apartment suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too ordinary. They're moving forward. So can we. When? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. When, Daniel? I don't know. 5 years. He lowered his eyes. Maybe. 10. Silence. I can't keep waiting. The words escaped before she realized how sharp they sounded. I'm tired of hoping. Daniel nodded slowly. As long as you're honest. I need more than love. He closed his eyes briefly. I know. 3 weeks later, Emily asked for a divorce. She expected arguments, promises, desperation. Instead, Daniel simply asked one question. Are you certain? She answered yes. He never tried to change her mind. That hurt almost as much as if he had begged, because somewhere deep inside, Emily wanted proof that leaving would destroy him. Instead, he respected her decision. Sometimes dignity feels colder than anger. Life moved quickly afterward. Emily accepted a position at a prestigious marketing agency. Better salary, modern office, luxury clients. She rented a beautiful apartment downtown. Everything she once imagined. Yet every evening, the silence sounded strangely familiar. There were no handwritten notes beside the coffee maker. No one remembered she disliked cilantro. No one texted to ask whether she had eaten lunch. The apartment was elegant. It never felt like home. She told herself adjustment simply took time. Then, 6 months later, Grace needed another routine examination. Emily accompanied her to St. Andrew Medical Center. The oncologist smiled after reviewing the scans. Everything looks excellent. Emily nearly cried with relief. As they prepared to leave, the billing clerk called them back. Mrs. Wilson? Yes. I believe there's an error in your records. Emily frowned. What kind of error? The clerk examined several old files. It says your account balance has been fully covered for years. Emily blinked. What do you mean? The outstanding treatment costs. There shouldn't be any outstanding costs. There were. The woman rotated the monitor. Someone made monthly payments anonymously. Emily felt her heartbeat slow. No. There were hundreds of transactions. Who? I'm sorry. Privacy regulations. Grace leaned closer. I think we're allowed to know if it concerns our own account. The clerk hesitated before opening another document. A name appeared. Daniel Carter. Emily stared without breathing. There must be a mistake. The clerk shook her head. No. She scrolled farther. Every chemotherapy session. Every surgery. Every medication refill. Every rehabilitation invoice. For almost 4 years, Emily felt the room tilt beneath her feet. After the divorce? Yes. She whispered the question she feared most. He kept paying? The clerk nodded gently. Even after the legal separation. Grace covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Oh my God. Emily couldn't hear anything else. Not the printers. Not the phones. Not the conversations around her. Only one memory returned. No steak. Maybe next week. She suddenly understood why there had never been steak. Why his jackets had become older. Why he always looked exhausted. Why every promise about the future had sounded so uncertain. He had been buying time. Not for himself. For her mother. And he had never told anyone. Not even Grace. Especially not Emily. Because real generosity doesn't announce itself. It simply continues. Emily left the hospital in tears. Not loud ones. The quiet kind that arrive when regret finally finds the truth. For the first time since their divorce, she realized she had never actually known the full story. And the truth was infinitely kinder than the version she had judged. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the payment records. Every date. Every receipt. Every transfer. They stretched across 4 years like invisible threads holding together a life she believed had survived on luck alone. She remembered complaining about old furniture while Daniel quietly transferred another month's treatment fee. She remembered accusing him of having no ambition while he worked double shifts to keep her mother alive. She remembered asking why he never bought himself new clothes. Now she knew. Because every dollar that could have become a new jacket had become another dose of chemotherapy. The realization settled inside her like a stone. Heavy. Permanent. That evening she drove to the small apartment where Daniel had lived after the divorce. The building looked exactly as she remembered. Old bricks. A narrow staircase. A mailbox with faded numbers. She stood outside for several minutes before knocking. No answer. She knocked again. An elderly woman opened the neighboring door. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Daniel Carter." The woman smiled sadly. "He moved almost a year ago." Emily felt her stomach tighten. "Do you know where?" "I'm afraid not." "Did he leave a forwarding address?" The woman shook her head. "He was a very quiet man." She paused before adding softly, "But he was the kindest neighbor I've ever had." Emily swallowed. "What do you mean?" The woman looked down the hallway. "My husband was bedridden for months. Daniel fixed our heater during winter. He refused payment. He carried groceries upstairs. He even drove us to doctor's appointments." Emily closed her eyes. The stories continued. "He always said." The old woman smiled gently. "Everyone needs help sometimes." Emily thanked her and walked back to her car without realizing tears were running down her face. She had spent years believing she knew the man she married. Now strangers seemed to know his heart better than she ever had. Over the following weeks, she searched for him whenever she had free time. She contacted former coworkers, old friends, even the engineering company where he had worked. He resigned. About 8 months ago. Do you know where he went? No. Did he leave any contact information? They asked us not to share it. Asked us. Not ordered. Asked. Even after leaving, Daniel still sounded like Daniel. Always polite. Never demanding. Emily almost gave up. Then Grace quietly entered the kitchen one Sunday morning carrying a small wooden box. "I think this belongs to you." Emily frowned. "What is it?" "I found it while cleaning." Inside were dozens of envelopes, each one addressed to Grace. None had ever been opened. The handwriting was unmistakable. Daniel's. Emily carefully unfolded the first letter. "Dear Mom, I know you don't like accepting help, so please don't think of this as charity. You once told me that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who stays when life becomes difficult. You stayed for me from the day Emily introduced us. Now it's my turn to stay for you. Please don't tell Emily. She already carries enough guilt believing she's interrupting our lives. Let her focus on loving you. I'll take care of the rest. Love, Daniel." Emily couldn't continue. Her vision blurred. Grace sat silently beside her. "I never opened them." Emily looked up. "Why?" "I knew they were from him." Grace smiled sadly. "But I also knew if I read them, I'd never be able to hate him for letting you leave." Emily covered her face. "I was horrible." "No." Grace gently held her daughter's hand. "You were scared. I was selfish. You were tired. I judged him." "Yes." Grace nodded. "You did." The honesty hurt more than comfort would have. "I kept thinking he wasn't enough." Grace looked toward the window. "The funny thing about enough." She smiled faintly. "Is that we usually discover it only after it's gone." Months passed. Emily stopped chasing promotions. Stopped buying things she didn't need. Stopped comparing her life to strangers on the internet. She began volunteering at the same cancer center where her mother had received treatment. She never spoke about Daniel. But every time she quietly paid for a patient's prescription without revealing her name, she felt a little closer to understanding him. Kindness, she realized, wasn't measured by grand gestures. It was measured by what people did when nobody was watching. One rainy afternoon, nearly 2 years after the divorce, Emily was delivering donated blankets to a community health clinic outside the city. The waiting room was nearly empty. She carried the last box down a hallway when she heard a familiar laugh. Warm. Gentle, unmistakable. Her heart stopped. She turned slowly. Daniel was kneeling beside a little girl in a wheelchair, helping her assemble a wooden puzzle. His hair was slightly longer now. There were more silver strands at his temples. His clothes were still simple. No expensive watch. No luxury suit. Just a faded blue sweater and kind eyes that hadn't changed. The little girl giggled as he deliberately pretended to lose the game. Emily stood frozen. For several seconds, she simply watched. He looked peaceful, not lonely, not broken, just peaceful, as if life had finally become quiet. The nurse noticed Emily. "Oh, are you looking for Mr. Carter?" Daniel turned. Their eyes met. Time seemed to pause. Neither spoke. Neither moved. The nurse smiled. "Mr. Carter volunteers here every Wednesday." Emily looked at Daniel in disbelief. "You volunteer?" He shrugged almost shyly. "I have free afternoons." The simplicity of the answer nearly shattered her. Not because it was surprising, because it was exactly what he would say, always making extraordinary kindness sound ordinary. The little girl tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Are you coming back next week?" He smiled. "I promised, didn't I?" She nodded happily. "You always keep your promises." Emily looked away. That single sentence pierced deeper than any accusation ever could. Because once upon a time, he had made promises to her too, and he had kept every single one of them. Daniel walked toward her with the same calm expression she remembered from the courthouse. No anger, no bitterness, only quiet surprise. "Emily." His voice was warm, almost gentle, as though years had passed without leaving scars. "Hi." The single word caught in her throat. She had rehearsed this moment hundreds of times. She imagined apologizing immediately, explaining, crying. Instead, she simply stood there, unable to find a sentence worthy of everything she had learned. Daniel broke the silence first. "How's your mother?" Emily blinked. Of all the questions he could have asked, that was the first. Not how she had been, not why she was there, not whether she was happy, only Grace. "She's doing well." His shoulders relaxed with visible relief. "I'm glad." He smiled, a quiet smile that reached his eyes. For a brief moment, Emily realized something heartbreaking. He had never stopped worrying about her family, even after she had stopped being his. The little girl in the wheelchair waved enthusiastically. "Mr. Carter, I finished the puzzle." Daniel turned immediately. "You did? I'm getting faster. I think you'll be teaching me soon." She laughed. The sound echoed through the hallway like sunlight after rain. Emily watched the interaction in silence. There was no performance, no audience, no expectation of praise. This was simply who Daniel had become, or perhaps who he had always been. The nurse approached with several folders. "Daniel, the therapy room is ready." He nodded. Then he looked back at Emily. "I have about 15 minutes. Would you like some coffee?" They walked to a small cafe across the street. It wasn't elegant, just a quiet place with wooden tables and the comforting smell of fresh bread. Daniel ordered black coffee, exactly as he always had. Emily noticed he still stirred it twice before taking the first sip. Some habits survived, even the hardest years. For a while, neither spoke. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally, Emily took a slow breath. "I know." Daniel looked at her. "The hospital. The payments. I found out." His eyes lowered to the coffee cup. "I wasn't trying to hide forever. You hid it for years. I didn't think it mattered." Emily stared at him. "It mattered." "No." He smiled gently. "What mattered was that your mother received treatment. Nothing else." Her hands trembled. "You sold everything. You worked yourself sick. You paid every bill." His expression remained calm. "And I divorced you." Daniel remained silent. The silence was never meant to accuse her. That somehow made it even harder to bear. "I'm sorry." The words escaped in a whisper. "I know sorry isn't enough." "No." He answered honestly. "It isn't." Emily closed her eyes. "I deserve that." "But," he continued softly, "I forgave you a long time ago." She looked up in disbelief. "What?" "I forgave you. When? The day you left." Emily couldn't understand. "How?" Daniel leaned back. "Because people don't leave when they stop being loved. They leave when they stop believing life can become better." He folded his hands on the table. "I knew you weren't choosing another man. You were choosing hope." Emily shook her head. "I chose money. You chose certainty. I was wrong. You were afraid." She laughed bitterly. "You always make excuses for everyone except yourself." Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" "The bills. The second job. The loans. The apartment." "Why?" He answered without hesitation. "Because if I had, every treatment your mother received would have felt like a debt you owed me." Emily froze. "I never wanted that. I wanted you to visit her because you loved her, not because you felt guilty." The words settled over the table. She suddenly remembered every evening Daniel insisted she stay at the hospital while he handled work. He had never wanted gratitude, only for her mother to survive. That was all. Emily reached into her handbag. Carefully, she placed a small envelope on the table. I've been saving. Daniel frowned. What is it? The amount you spent. I calculated everything. There are cashier's checks. I know it isn't enough. He gently pushed the envelope back toward her. I can't take it. Please. No. It belongs to you. It never did. You sacrificed your future. Daniel smiled. My future was never money. Emily's voice broke. Then what was it? He looked through the rain-covered window. For a long time, it was seeing the people I loved smile. A long silence followed. Then he added quietly, now. It's simply living honestly. Emily realized something in that moment. Daniel wasn't poor. He had never been poor. She had confused wealth with possessions. But the richest person at that table had always been the one whose heart remained generous after being broken. As they prepared to leave, Emily finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had haunted her for months. Is there? She hesitated. Any chance we could start again? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked outside where the rain had begun to stop. Sunlight pushed gently through the clouds. When he finally turned back, there was kindness in his eyes. But there was also peace. A different kind of peace. The kind that comes after surviving something you never thought you could. I'll always care about you, Emily. Her heart raced. But the single word carried more weight than anger ever could. The man who spent every day trying to earn your love doesn't exist anymore. She lowered her eyes. I know. I hope he doesn't. Daniel smiled sadly. I had to become someone else. Not harder, just wiser. I finally learned that love isn't something you prove by sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left. Emily wiped away another tear. I understand now. I wish I had understood sooner. So do I. Neither blamed the other. Neither argued. Some endings become peaceful only after both people stop trying to rewrite the past. Outside, the rain had completely stopped. Daniel stood. I should get back. The kids are waiting. Emily nodded. Thank you. He looked at her curiously. For what? For loving us. Even after we stopped deserving it. Daniel smiled gently. I never loved people because they deserved it. I loved them because I chose to. He walked toward the clinic without looking back. This time, Emily didn't ask him to stay. Some people return to your life not to be yours again, but to teach you who you should have been. Months later, Emily established a charitable fund for families struggling to pay for cancer treatment. She named it the Quiet Promise Foundation. There was no plaque bearing Daniel's name. He would never have wanted one. Instead, every anonymous payment sent from the foundation carried a single handwritten sentence. May this kindness reach you before despair does. Grace remained cancer-free. The little girl Daniel tutored eventually learned to walk with the help of therapy. Emily continued volunteering every weekend. Sometimes she saw Daniel in the hallways. Sometimes they shared coffee. Sometimes they simply smiled at each other from across the room. Neither spoke about the past anymore, because forgiveness had already done what words never could. Years later, a young volunteer asked Emily why she dedicated so much of her life to strangers. She smiled toward the waiting room, where Daniel was patiently helping an elderly man fill out medical forms. Then she answered softly, I once knew a man who taught me that the greatest acts of love are often the ones no one ever sees. The volunteer followed her gaze. He seems like a remarkable person. Emily smiled. He is. She didn't say he had once been her husband. She didn't explain that she had walked away from the best man she had ever known. Some truths no longer needed to hurt. They simply needed to be honored. And as the afternoon sunlight poured through the clinic windows, Daniel laughed with another patient who had almost given up hope. Emily watched him for a moment before returning to her work. She no longer wished she could go back and change the past. Instead, she chose to become the kind of person who would never again overlook quiet goodness simply because it wasn't loud. Because she had finally learned the lesson that arrived years too late. Love isn't always found in expensive gifts, grand speeches, or perfect timing. Sometimes, it hides inside unpaid sleep, worn-out jackets, anonymous bank transfers, and hands that keep giving long after they have been emptied. Daniel never became rich enough to make headlines. He never appeared on magazine covers. The world never celebrated his sacrifices. But somewhere, in hospital rooms filled with second chances, in families who were allowed one more Christmas together, in mothers who lived long enough to watch their grandchildren grow. His quiet love continued to echo, and perhaps that was the greatest legacy anyone could leave behind.